Critical peer review. So it's common issues with revising your peer work and solutions to streamline the process. So because I'm an editor and a writer, this is mainly focused on document review and document review within engineering firms or scientific firms. But the principles herein can be applied in other areas of needing to review your peers' work as well. So when we think about technical review and putting out products that are going to be going to our clients, we think about, professional issues, did we get the science right? Do we have all the pieces of engineering there that we need? Are our procedures and logic working really well? Is our quality up there? So when we approach a review as a reviewer, these are the things that are top of mind for us. However, these mice are all here to help us think about the fact that people get in the way of the logic, right? We've got the client, Mr. Moneybags with the hat there. Clients all have what they want and what they think is important, whether it's capitalized words or the way they want things said, that can be important. We've got a couple of happy engineers down here on the left who are pleased with the way things are and they don't think there's any problems. I'm on the right hand side here, we've got the manager, the woman with the pink hair there. She's the manager mouse that through this series, she kept on being the manager. So the manager, of course, has a variety of people reporting to and interacting with her. There's the people that are always bringing the compliments and the flowers, who the other people might not like very much. There's the complaining person, whether that's the employee who's not happy with being reviewed or the person who's always finding fault with the other employees. There's the unhappy person who doesn't feel heard, perhaps. So all of these people and all of these emotions can have a big effect on how effective your review process can be. So on top of the professional issues, the logic, the quality, and the procedures we want, you can get time pressures, which might be put there by a demanding client, or they might be put there by some of the members of the team being late, which I've also got videos about, that we discuss in the UBC course about review, the different time pressures. People just don't realize sometimes what the other team members have to do, and can cause problems inadvertently. And of course, the big red dot on the left, right? Emotional and ego issues, which we would all like to think that professionals are able to set aside when they're doing their work. But the actual fact is this can affect us much more than we think. It's easy to not think about those issues, and then they can cause a big problem. They can cause scheduling problems. They can cause client problems. So we're going to talk about that through this video. So the emotional components come into play when we give feedback and when we receive feedback. So there's a lot of self-awareness here, not only being a good communicator to others, but also how do we receive that and how do we talk to ourselves about feedback that we get? And then there's the practical components, how are we going to prioritize our edits, for example? So I think one of the best communications business guys for professional communications is Dale Carnegie. And one of his very first rules is do not criticize, condemn, or complain if you want to win friends. Of course, the review process is all about criticism, right? So how can you win friends and influence people if part of your job is criticizing, right? Your whole job is to be critical of your colleagues' work. So as editors, we're often seen as cranky librarians wearing our glasses all the time. How can we moderate that effect? How can we become more of a team player instead of just the person who's always, putting everybody else down, which isn't what we're trying to do. We're just after the quality of the process, right? And the second piece is, how can you cope with the experience of being reviewed, which seems like somebody is criticizing, condemning, and complaining about your own work. And I know we should all experience the flip side of everything. And as a writer, of course, as a professional writer, I seek out people to edit my work, and I hate being edited. right? Like you've got to just accept that there are emotions, feel those emotions, ride through them to the other side and get professional. So part one, giving feedback. So to give is better than to receive, right? We always say that at Christmas time. And in the review process, it's way easier to give feedback than it is to receive feedback. So, here's the editor and she's saying, I was able to improve your paper so much. It looks so much better now. I just love this new version. Meanwhile, the writer is thinking, my paper is full of red marks. I, put hours, sometimes dozens of hours into this document. And now the editor is wanting you to change all this stuff, or the manager's wanting you to change all this stuff. It is not a good feeling. I think we've all experienced that. So there's a definite difference in perception here. And what we're looking at is how can we draw this perception closer together so that both team members feel good about it. And of course, the client feels good about it at the other end. So some tips from Dale Carnegie. Begin in a friendly way. Praise the slightest improvement and every improvement. So I know when I teach the course on reviewing, one of the requirements of the assignment is praise the writer at the beginning. And I would say I had to send back about 75% of the assignments at first to say, please give this another shot. You need to praise the writer before I'm accepting this as done. So, and even myself, when I send reviews, it's so easy to just attack all the things that need fixing and not say, hey, this is actually really cool. I love that you researched this detail, or I like the way you presented this. There's always something that you can praise, even if you think it's a terrible job, you can say, I can see you put a lot of effort into this, for example. Practice your praise. Speak in terms of the other person's interests. So for example, in a corporate situation, we would always hope that we're all pulling together to give the client the best document. So we just want to talk about, I think this would be presented so much better if we put it in a bulleted list, or I can really see that we could put this into a table, or I've corrected some of the misplaced uses of the word the, which I know it's really tricky for you being English second language, figuring out where the word the goes. So I've helped you here. That's a really common one that needs to be fixed. And so if you are an English second language writer, professional, do take a look at where you put the word the, and don't judge the fact if you find it difficult to figure that one out. That takes decades of knowing English if you've learned it as an adult learner. So the professional thing to do is just get somebody to help. Dale Carnegie also says, smile and be cheerful, use their name and be genuinely interested in them. So that all goes along with praise, right? If you can really think of the other person's viewpoint and just go over after you've reviewed it and put those elements of cheerfulness in, that will help them accept your feedback. Team roles. Who should be praising who? So again, we have the ridiculous team of mice to help us think about the teams at work, right? So we've got women, we've got men, we've got managers, we've got engineers, we've got salespeople, we've got clients. It's interesting, throughout the last 25 years of my career, I occasionally run into somebody who says, I don't want to praise so-and-so because I don't want them to get a big head, or I don't want to praise so-and-so and look like I don't know what I'm doing. I think that what I've learned is that the successful, happy, high-level people are not afraid to praise others, whether that's the janitor, the cashier, their colleagues, their direct reports, their equals, or their superiors. My answer to who should you praise everybody as much as you can. That's not to say flattery. I'm not saying fake it. I'm saying genuinely find out what you can appreciate about those other people. And if you are surrounded by people you cannot appreciate, and you really have to try super hard to find what you like about them, then maybe it's time for you to surround yourself with different people. You need to surround yourself with people that you enjoy. So once you've figured out the good things, then put that effort in, give people praise. It's like you're giving them a bit of flowers. That effort is going to come through, and it's going to make things more productive in your work life. So I would love it if you can drop into the chat some helpful tips that you have about reviewing the writing of members of your team, or to share with the group. So maybe pause this video and write in the comments, any questions or helpful tips that you have for others. You may have written down that there's a typo on this slide. So if you did what was instinctive, what you did is you typed, "There's a typo on your slide." And you didn't think to say, "Oh, I'm enjoying this webinar, and by the way, there's a typo on your slide." So that just goes to show you, if you engaged with the activity, that it's very instinctive for us to go and say, "Hey, you misspelled the word writing," and not say the praise first. And in a webinar situation, since I've just talked about that, you probably thought you didn't need to praise me. And it's just as easy to not praise your colleagues. So be careful about that. Part 2, receiving feedback, the emotional part. Okay. Remember that the person who is revising your paper is really trying to do their best for you. Reviewing is a lot of effort. It's a lot of work. And if they've scribbled all over your paper with red, they haven't done it to insult you. They have done it to try and help you improve. Now, that doesn't mean you have to agree with everything that they say. Some editors, and this is the nice thing, if you can get somebody that you trust to review your work, then it makes the relationship a lot easier, because you know that you're going to be able to accept most of their reviews. I know that I have a hard time finding people that I'm happy having editing my stuff, but when I do, then I can trust them and I don't have to change everything that they say. So find those relationships. And if you're at work, or if you're working with a publishing house, for example, on a textbook, you need to put the good of the team quality above your own ego. So especially when I was working with high school textbooks, I would work with teachers who had won awards, and they thought that their curriculum should go into the textbook, and they thought it should be written exactly the way they wanted it to be written. But we were dealing as editors, as the middle people in between the writer, who wants to deliver a certain type of curriculum and view of chemistry to the students, and the government, who's telling us how the textbook has to look, the publishing house, the teams of reviewers, the teams of parents and teachers who come into this. So they're saying, okay, we need this written at a certain writing level so that kids can read it. We want pull-out boxes to explain this. We want the problem solving method to be really standardized, and we want it to have these 5 steps. So all of those things are more important than the individual egos, and you can't always accommodate everything. So it's important in a review process to understand when there are other reasons that people are changing your text. So I gave the educational textbook example, but the same kind of thing happens with client documents that are going to large companies, right? There's corporate reasons, for example, ways that we speak about Indigenous lands. The corporate people that are in charge of those Indigenous relationships talk to the nations involved, and it's important that we use that. Just because you have friends on that same Indigenous land or Indigenous group who tell you something different doesn't mean that we can do your thing instead of the corporate thing. If we're going to, then it needs to be discussed. So just be aware of being part of the team. Even if you think you know better than what people are doing, have a discussion about why it is that things are done that way. Maybe it can change, but it's got to be a good discussion. So again, we're focused on, we all want to turn out the best documents we can, which means they're going to be readable, accessible, and usable for the reader and not offend anybody. So how to handle edits that feel terrible. So, and I've received lots of edits that feel terrible in my career. The more you go out, the more you're going to fail. That's one way to think of it. But another thing is also, Don't view it as failure. Just view it as part of the process. You know, feeling terrible is the weather. Your emotions are the weather. You can watch them and you don't necessarily have to react to them the same way. You know, you can see that it's raining and you can stay inside and pout, or you can put on your rain jacket and go outside. Same thing with these edits. So first thing you might consider the source. How valid is that source? So as I said, some editors I would agree with, and other ones I might think, well, they don't really know what they're talking about. For example, I had a British person tell me to change all the punctuation on one of my webinars recently, but it wasn't proper because of that. It was for an international audience, so it didn't necessarily make sense to switch it to British style. So we had a conversation about it and decided what we were going to do together. Now, Don Miguel Ruiz, The Four Agreements, is a really excellent book. You may have seen it before. If you haven't read this book, it's a very simple little book, but profound. So the four agreements are, first, be impeccable with your word. That means you say something, you do the thing you said you would do. 2, don't take anything personally, particularly the edits. So as we said, think of all the other reasons that people have for doing things. And I had this pop up in business relations recently too. You know, one person was annoying somebody else in the group and the other person was taking what they were doing very personally. And I was able to step in and say, look, person A is going through a bunch of family issues right now. I know that they were really cranky to you and that wasn't necessarily professional, but it wasn't actually anything to do with you. And then the second person was able to calm down about it. Don't make assumptions. So again, don't make assumptions about how the other person is behaving. Don't assume it's to do with you. Don't assume that you know the reasons. And always do your best. So if you just bring your most graceful, professional self to the table, that's all you can do. You can't control the other people. There's no point in taking them personally. Just do the best that you can do, hold your grace, understand your reasons for doing things, and be able to communicate those reasons. In the Four Agreements, Don Miguel Ruiz reveals the source of self-limiting beliefs that rob us of joy and create needless suffering. That's from the review of the book, the back of the book. It's basically what the four things which I just said, right? So if we adhere to these things, if we are honest with our word, if we're always doing our best, then that makes it a lot easier not to take things personally and not to make assumptions. So that will limit our suffering. That will make our life better, right? We don't have limits because we're doing our best, or maybe we acknowledge where our limits are, but cheerfully. So on this book, they also say, based on ancient Toltec wisdom, the Four Agreements offers a powerful code of conduct that can rapidly transform our lives to new experiences of freedom, happiness, and love. And you might not think happiness and love and freedom are about your career, but when teams are happy and free and enjoying each other, they're way more effective. You go to work happy, you work more productively, you turn out better quality, and you go home happier. So here's a survey that you can answer and put your answer in the chat or just think about this. So when you receive edits to your work or comments on your job, are you able to emotionally detach? And I'd love to hear your reflections in the comments below this video. It's an interesting question. So now we're just going to talk about a little practical strategy on dealing with tracked changes. So tracked changes is the way that, I'm just going to show an example of it. So this is the way that we show the changes. So we don't just go into the document and make changes without showing what they are. We actually show them in red, and then the document, we can see what they're done, and the writer can then accept or reject what the editor has done. So the most efficient method of this, because I do plenty of 20, 40, 60, 100-page documents, and obviously the author doesn't want to have to go through, all 60,000 words again. So what I do with the clients that I trust is I put a comment wherever I'm not sure if I've changed the meaning. So when they receive that document back, they can go and look at all my comments. They can resolve the ones they might either need to answer a question if I didn't understand for sure, or they might just be able to go through and fix things up. Then they can just accept all the changes. And if you have a good working relationship, then you can trust the editor to have commented on anything that would be dicey. So then you can accept all of them, and then you can double check it with those all accepted. Another option is you can turn on just simple feedback so that you only see the comments and you don't see those red underlines. That can be helpful. So here, for example, I write, I think sacrificed is normally in a religious context because they had sacrificed by anesthetic overdose, and I put euthanized. So this was a biology paper. And so sometimes English second language writers have to get words out of the dictionary, and sometimes they're not exactly the right word. So what happens when somebody hands you a stack of papers like this and says, you have 3 hours, please fix it? This happened to me when I was working in an engineering company. So time pressures. So ideally for technical documents, I would love to have an hour for every 1,000 words and a day for 5,000 words, because I often work on it and maybe sleep on it and then look back at it the next day. And I, some of the things I commented on or didn't understand, because I edit pretty technical, complicated stuff. Sometimes the next day I will understand it. And so I don't have to ask so many comments of the writer. And that also helps me just gel and make sure that the edits are all making sense. So if you're sending your editors, 20,000 words to do in a day, you're probably not getting the best editing job that they're able to do. But sometimes you just have to do that, right? So what could you do if someone slings an 18,000 word document your way with only 3 hours to work on it? So prioritize, work smart, not hard. So we cannot simply start at the beginning, edit line by line all the way through. If you have 20,000 words, you don't have time to do that. So it's good to know which edits have the best impact overall. So some edits, like safety edits and legal edits, are essential. Other edits are nice to have, like reducing the amount of words and whatnot. So the key to doing the maximum job in the minimum time is triaging your task. So work smart, not hard. So the triage that I suggest is written up in the 10-minute editor, which again is in the course. Or you can email me or write me nicely on LinkedIn and ask for it, and I will share it. But under crazy time constraints, you cannot simply start at the beginning and work through to the end. So we need a triage process. So the next slides, we're going to do a brief version of the triage process. So when you first see a document, give it a 5 or 10-minute scan with a notebook beside you. So make a note of major errors, minor errors and optimizations you can make, and cosmetic issues. So just quickly, right? Just quickly. And so we don't usually print out large documents right now. So you're not really doing a page flip. You're just making notes in a notebook. So and it would be good to pause the video right now and actually think about this for yourself. Which of these kind of errors do you think are most important to fix if I'm an editor sitting in an engineering office and I receive a 20,000 word document with 3 hours to do it? Which one do you think I do first? And you might want to write some examples of major errors and minor errors. Here's some errors that I would see. Major errors are going to be, as we said, legal errors, safety errors, scope errors. We definitely want to make sure that we're not putting anything that was out of our scope. Budgetary errors, procedure errors, those are important. Minor errors and optimizations you can make. This would be things like getting rid of the passive voice, fixing up the grammar, that word "the" that I mentioned. People can generally read their way around that, but you don't leave a professional impression. If you are able to get someone to fix that, do get that fixed up. Cosmetic issues. So cosmetic issues are often fixed by corporate templates. They look nice and slick. We want to make sure that the pages just look good. When the pages don't look good, people think maybe the engineering is sloppy or the science is sloppy, and that's usually not the case. So do pay attention to those cosmetic issues. People attribute more to it than they probably should, but you should just know that and take that into account in what you produce. So one thing that can really help, especially if you're doing international documents where you've got multiple authors contributing to a consulting paper, which is very common, of course. If you get Perfectit at intelligentediting.com, it's pretty inexpensive, and it can tell you when you've got multiple spellings of the same word. It can tell you if you've defined your acronyms properly at first use, and if you've made acronyms that you only use once that you want to delete. I mean, you can do this very painstakingly without Perfectit, but when you just have Perfectit and you run it on the whole document really quickly, it just chews through it all. It'll generate, you know, an acronym list of 200 acronyms or whatever you've got there. Very good piece of software, Perfectit. Definitely an editor's favorite. The next thing I say to do is look at the organization and appearance. So how the report looks is the first impression that clients get. And as I said, they can apply a lot of importance to it. This is why it's worth it for corporations to have corporate templates. There's a reason. They look slick and it's branded and people know that it's coming from your company. It's important. So another thing I do, which can increase the readability a lot, is to make sure that the main points of the story are at the beginning of each paragraph. So I know when I'm starting to work with people who haven't worked with editors before or new writers, they often bury the most important points in the middle of a paragraph, 3/4 of the way down the page. Nobody reads those paragraphs anymore. People skim read. We're so used to the internet. There are not that many people that sit down and plow through a report. The more we can make it easier for people to access our points, just by simply putting them out where they're easy to see, the better results we're going to get with people processing our information. So be aware of that. So here's an example of this, right? So where does your eye go to? It probably just jumps to those first lines, right? So you probably, you read perhaps the social construction theorists at the top. That looks like a heavy paragraph, so you probably skip it down to, oh, Albert Einstein, Niels Bohr. That's interesting. Then you probably read the whole sentence of, okay, science ought to be objective, which we could all agree with. Then you're probably going to skip that next paragraph because it seems big. You might skim through, you see the word objectivity is in there, and Buddhism. Interesting, doesn't seem relevant. The observer matters. And then you're going to read the bulleted list because everybody likes the bulleted list, and you're going to read the bold points. So if you are presented a report that only has 4 large paragraphs on the page, where do you think the reader's eye is going to go? Just the first sentences. It's unpleasant to read the deep paragraph if we don't have to. It's much more pleasant to read the bulleted list or to read the single sentence. So keep that in mind. So if it's something you don't want people to know, bury it in there in the middle with superconductivity in that paragraph. If it's something that you do want people to know, then pull it out. Maybe give it some bold font, maybe put it into a bulleted list, right? So there's several reasons for writing science in the first person, reading this bulleted list at the bottom. The author, ding, 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 4 things. So those 4 things take on extra importance. They seem like the most important thing on this page because they've been made the most easy to read. So if, and it may or may not be the most important thing on this page, I did it as an exercise with the author's permission, by the way. This is Matthew Stevens's book. It's an excellent, funny read, free on my webpage if you want it. But the point is, the important points there are pulled out in the bulleted list. So if you have, you know, my recommendations for this site are to do these 4 things, 1, 2, 3, 4. Don't put them in a paragraph, pull them out in a bulleted list. Maybe put them at the top of the next page. People have gotten in the habit of just putting everything in paragraphs, especially if they did a PhD and we're doing a lot of research journal articles. But once you come into business and into the corporate world, pulling things out to be more easy to read is definitely the way to go. Think about your reports looking like magazines or web pages. You can use a pull-up box. You can use images. You can use tables. You're not stuck to paragraphs, and paragraphs. Another reason I guess people use long paragraphs is that they had an English teacher at some point who begged and pleaded with people to write long paragraphs. But keep in mind, that was a person at the front of a class dealing with children. And trying to deal with children who generally didn't write enough. So begging them to write enough. Now that you've taken your math and your science way, way beyond what you learned at school, and your writing should also come into that professional sphere. So look at the professional resources you enjoy reading and make your writing look like them. Or instead of just like put all your thoughts down onto the page at first, but then shape them. Shape that appearance. So the appearance can almost matter more than the content. And we have some readability webinars also available there, also on my YouTube. There's readability tricks. Take a look, learn. Priority 2, when I'm editing a report, the very important thing is the bread at the beginning and the end, right? The introduction and the conclusion. So make sure that your introduction tells clearly what you aimed to do in that report. The conclusion clearly tells the recommendations and what was found in that report. Check that the table of contents presents everything in a logical order with balanced content and proportions. In the UBC course, I pull an example out of the British Columbia Government Ministry that has missed 23 pages approximately of the report in the table of contents, and that was propagated over a 12-year, 15-year span of people just continuing to make that mistake that they didn't check that the table of contents was working properly. So keep in mind that table of contents is our roadmap to the document. Having a good table of contents, a good introduction, and good conclusion is important because these 3 pieces plus the executive summary might be the only pieces that a lot of people even bother to read. So if your introduction and conclusion are flaky, not hanging around well together, they don't include who, what, where, when, why, and how, then people are going to be annoyed and they're going to feel that your report's probably flaky as well. These are super important to get solid. So who, what, where, when, why, and how is what should be in your introduction. Okay. And they should be giving you a clear purpose and a clear picture of what's going on. So you write that content beginning, but then at the end, you go back and make sure that those parts are very solid. Okay. So now we can dive into the nitty-gritty, right? By which I mean potentially liable or offensive errors, fact errors, or financial blunders. So the reason I'm pointing this out is because senior reviewers, who are the ones who originally hired me to edit for engineers, have a really hard time reviewing the engineering if they are stuck in a mass of bad grammar. So if your report is a mess, it's really hard for the senior reviewers to get in there and look at what's actually going on. So often the young engineer just wants to shovel this off to the manager. And then the manager, I've seen so many managers stay up way overnight, up till 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning, trying to get stuff out to clients because the younger people didn't do their proper job of turning a good looking paper over. So don't do that. So there can still be more high level work to do. You want to give your managers a nice pool to dive into, not this stinking mess of trash. And I can tell you a lot of senior people report to me that they get the stinking mess of trash from the beginners. And guess who they want to promote? They want to promote the people that give them this kind of report, this kind of experience, right? Maybe the science isn't absolutely perfect, but at least you've given them your absolutely best effort, right? Like in the 4 agreements, give your best, and then you don't have to take things personally. You'll find the senior reviewers will find the errors and you will cope with them together as a team. If you're giving them a mess, It's like you're not caring about your manager's experience, and you're not going to get promoted if you're consistently turning in messes. So you should definitely be having the correct grammar and punctuation. Chances are that your company has style guides for that. If not, there's the Chicago Manual of Style, which is available online. There's the Canadian Style, which is available online. If you have any questions about this, contact me. I'm happy to share information about this with you. Paragraphs should have one idea. Sentences should be simple and straightforward. So your writing should be clear, basically, is what this is saying. Clear and error-free. Shouldn't have spelling mistakes. Shouldn't be gobbledygook. And if you're feeling really, really rushed and you're turning it into your manager, think about what stages they have to do next. Okay, don't shovel them off a messy pool. If you need more time to fix it up or you need help to fix it up, then communicate that. Fourth priority is to get rid of trash. So many words can be completely discarded or replaced with much shorter phrases. This can be done with a search and replace or a macro, which I have some other videos about. There are wordiness lists on the internet. So sample search terms are wordy phrases or plain language substitutions. I also have some free books on my webpage that you could download, or we go into much more detail on this in the University of British Columbia modules. So you can find these wordiness lists. So for example, instead of saying the majority of, you can just say most. Instead of saying because of the fact that, you can just say due to. So those kind of trash phrases are something, when we clear them out, the pool just gets much clearer and your scientific message is much more easy to receive. Fifth priority on my list is turning passive language into active language. So we would never say the horse was ridden by somebody, right? We would say somebody rode the horse. Or maybe we would say the horse and woman were a team. But the key to this being a bad sentence is the word was here. So the thing is, ride is already a verb, right? So because ride is a verb, but here, you see, was ridden, it's put into the past tense. So that once you do that, then you have to start adding by and a bunch of other words. So passive language does not help your cause. So once you've done that cleanup job, then you can give your senior reviewers a beautiful clean pool to dive into, not one that looks like this.